Tonight, we're diving into the legends and lore of the dragons that haunt the darkest corners of Tolkien's universe. With the Rings of Power series returning soon, there's no better time to immerse ourselves in the mythos of these majestic, fire-breathing creatures. From the mighty Smaug to the long-forgotten dragons of the First Age. Journey with me to a world where the line between legend and reality is deliciously thin. So let's settle in for an evening of dragon lore, where every tale brings us closer to the heart of Middle-earth. And if you'd like a way to support the channel, consider tossing a coin to your Witcher and check out my Patreon for some extra benefits. I hope you've found your way to a cozy nook, just the right place for tales as timeless as the mountains of Middle-earth and as deep as the dark forests of Fangorn. As you settle in, perhaps with a warm cup of tea or something stronger, let's take a gentle stroll into the world of dragons and legends. Middle-earth is a vast and storied land, where the ancient past and the present weave together in epic proportions. It's a place where dragons slumber beneath mountains of gold, where the echoes of forgotten battles still whisper through the ages, and where the very earth is steeped in tales of old. I've always had a special fondness for the dragons in Tolkien's world, not just because of their immense power, but because of their intelligence and their ability to speak that brings a whole new level of intrigue to their characters. There's something mesmerizing about the way they wield their words, casting trances over those who dare to engage them. Smaug, with his cunning mind and silver tongue, is a perfect example. Able to ensnare even the most stalwart adventurers with his sly words and dangerous charm. It's that combination of raw power and sharp intellect that makes these dragons so unforgettable and so very dangerous. And so we're not only exploring the legends themselves, but also the rich themes and characters that breathe life into them. We'll meet the cunning Smaug, who hoarded his treasure in the heart of the Lonely Mountain, and we'll uncover the ancient dragons of the First Age, whose power was unmatched. We'll delve into the mysteries of the Dark Lord's creations and the ancient battles that shaped the fate of Middle-earth. But before we embark on this journey, take a moment to breathe in deeply and slowly. Let the worries of the day slip away, like the last light of the sun setting behind the misty mountains. Picture yourself in a quiet, dimly lit study, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. A map of Middle-earth spread out before you, waiting to be explored. Now, if you're not familiar with Tolkien's world, no worries. We're on this journey together, step by step, uncovering the secrets and stories that have captivated readers for generations. And if you are familiar, well, I hope to bring a fresh perspective, a new insight, or perhaps just a comfortable, familiar walk down memory lane. Some of my fondest memories are around watching the Tolkien films with my father and brother and reading the books after my classes. So allow yourself to drift, to sink deeper into your warm and cozy armchair, to let the soft glow and warmth of the fire lull you into a state of relaxation. Outside, the night is calm, and the stars are beginning to twinkle in the velvet sky. It's the perfect setting to lose ourselves in Middle-earth, Close your eyes if you like, and let my voice guide you. We're in no hurry here. This is your time to unwind, to let go, and to let the stories carry you away. Now that we're settled in, and our minds are beginning to drift into the world of Middle-earth, let's take a closer look at where it all began. You see, the story of dragons, like many things in Tolkien's world, starts with the grand tapestry of creation and the first notes of discord that crept into it. In the beginning, before the world was shaped, there was Eru Ilúvatar. He is known as the One, the supreme creator of all, existing beyond time and space, and the source from which all existence flows. Eru Ilúvatar is a figure of immense mystery and power, the ultimate architect of the universe, whose thoughts gave birth to everything that was, is, and will be. From his thought came the Ainur, the Holy Ones, who were the first beings created by Eru. The Ainur were spirits of immense power and wisdom, each of them embodying a particular aspect of Eru's thought and purpose. Sound familiar? They are akin to angels or demigods, existing in a realm beyond the physical world, in the timeless halls. The Ainur were given the task of shaping the world according to Eru's grand design, bringing his vision into reality through their collective will and creativity. Each Ainur, singular of Ainur, had their own unique gifts and qualities, and they were divided into two groups. The greater Ainur, known as the Valar, who would take on the most significant roles in shaping and governing the world, and the lesser Ainur, known as the Maiar, who served the Valar and aided in the execution of Eru's grand plan. Among these Ainur, one stood out for his immense power, brilliance, and ambition: Melkor. It's here that our tale takes a darker turn. You see, Melkor was the mightiest of the Ainur, blessed with power that surpassed his peers. But with great power often comes great desire, and Melkor's heart was filled with a yearning to create, to dominate, and to bend the world to his own will. He wasn't content to simply follow the designs of Ilúvatar. No, Melkor wanted to craft his own. So as the Ainur sang the world into being, it was Melkor who introduced the first notes of discord, a disharmony that would eventually manifest in the very fabric of the world itself. This discord sowed the seeds of evil and set the stage for all the dark things that would follow. After the world was shaped, Melkor descended into it, taking on physical form and setting himself up as a Dark Lord. He sought to dominate all of Arda, the world, and to make it his own. It's important to note here that in those early days, there was no Sauron, no orcs, and no dragons. There was only Melkor, the first Dark Lord, and his insatiable hunger for power. Now, Melkor wasn't alone in his endeavors. He had a following, a group of lesser Ainur who were drawn to his strength and vision. Among these followers was a Maiar named Mairon, who you might know better as Sauron. He was perhaps the mightiest of them, and was corrupted into the dark service. But we'll get to him in due time. For now, let's focus on Melkor, and the first of his fearsome creations. To truly understand the dragons, we must first understand what drove Melkor to create such creatures. His ambition wasn't just to rule, it was to corrupt, to twist the beautiful things of the world into forms that served his purposes. He sought to mock the works of the Valar, who, as a reminder of the higher order I know that remained faithful to Ilúvatar, by creating twisted imitations of their creations. Where the Valar created light, life, and beauty, Melkor brought forth darkness, destruction, and fear. It was from this dark desire that the dragons were born. They were not simply beasts of fire and fury. They were manifestations of Melkor's will, imbued with his malice and hunger for destruction. But creating such creatures was no small feat. It required time, power, and the right conditions. The first of these mighty beasts, the progenitor of all dragons in Middle-earth, was Glaurung, known as the Father of Dragons. But before we dive into his tale, let's take a moment to appreciate what Melkor had wrought in him. Glaurung wasn't just a dragon. He was a weapon, a tool of domination, and a symbol of Melkor's enduring influence over the world. And so, it was with Glaurung that the Age of Dragons began. A time of fire and fear, of cities laid to ruin and of heroes tested in the crucible of battle. But even in this darkness, there were glimmers of hope. Moments of defiance that would shape the destiny of Middle-earth for ages to come. Let's turn our attention now to the First Age of Middle-earth, a time when the world was young and the shadow of Melkor lay heavy across the lands. The First Age was an era of great heroes and epic conflicts, where the forces of light and darkness battled for dominion over the world. It was a time when the elves first came into their full power and beauty, establishing great kingdoms, and when men awoke and began to play their part in the unfolding drama of Middle-earth. Beleriand, a vast and fabled region in the northwest of Middle-earth, was once the heartland of powerful elven kingdoms. These realms were ruled by mighty elven lords. This age was marked by the long and bitter struggle against Melkor, who had by then taken the name Morgoth, meaning Black Foe of the World, a name given to him in hatred by Fëanor, the greatest of the elven craftsmen. Morgoth sought to dominate all of Middle-earth, twisting it to his will and spreading his malice far and wide. His stronghold was the mighty fortress of Unband, from which he unleashed his dark legions upon the free peoples of the world. Glaurung wasn't like the dragons you might be familiar with from other stories. He didn't have wings, nor could he fly. Instead, he was a massive, serpentine beast, covered in scales as hard as iron, with a belly full of fire and a mind as sharp as any sword. But what truly set Glaurung apart was his intelligence. He wasn't just a beast. He was a creature of malice and craft, capable of deceit and manipulation just as much as he was capable of destruction. Glaurung first emerged from Angband, the fortress of Morgoth, in the year 260 of the First Age. At this time, the elves of Beleriand were still holding their own against Morgoth's forces. But the appearance of Glaurung began to shift the balance of power. The great dragon led a host of orcs in an assault on the elven strongholds, and his presence on the battlefield was like nothing the world had ever seen. Imagine, if you will, the terror of facing such a creature. He and his kind were unlike anything Middle-earth had come across. A monster born from nightmares. His breath carried the stench of death. His scales were an unyielding armor, and his gaze alone could paralyze even the bravest of warriors. The elves, valiant as they were, stood little chance against Glaurung in the open field of battles, and the shadow of doom began to creep over Beleriand. But as with all good tales, there was a twist. For Glaurung, for all his might, was still young, and perhaps a bit too eager to prove his strength. His attack was premature, and the elves, under the leadership of Fingon, managed to drive him back to Angband. For a time, he was contained, and the elves were given a brief respite from the terror he had unleashed. This early encounter with the beast, though, was just a taste of what was to come. Over the years, as the war against Morgoth dragged on, Glaurung grew in power and cunning. He became a key weapon in Morgoth's arsenal, not just for his strength in battle, but for his ability to corrupt and manipulate those he encountered. Perhaps even more fearsome than their physical might were dragons' ability to wield a form of dark magic known as dragon spells and trances. Some dragons possessed an almost hypnotic power that allowed them to cast spells over their victims, ensnaring their minds and bending their wills to the dragon's malevolent purposes. Glaurung in particular was infamous for using his powers of deception and mind control to manipulate others, leading them to acts of despair and madness. His gaze alone could place individuals under a trance, leaving them paralyzed and helpless as he wove his dark magic around them. One of the most tragic tales involving Glaurung is that of Turin Turambar, a man cursed by Morgoth and driven to a life of sorrow and despair. Turin's story is a long and complex one, filled with twists of fate and moments of profound tragedy. But it is Glaurung who plays a pivotal role in his ultimate doom. He used his dark magic and his malevolent intelligence to torment Chirin, leading him to commit terrible acts without fully understanding the consequences. His method was insidious. He manipulated Chirin's perception of reality, clouding his judgment and sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust. Through subtle lies and twisted truths, the dragon convinced Turin that those closest to him, his friends, his allies, even his own family, were his enemies. In one of his most heinous acts, Glaurung deceived Turin into abandoning his beloved sister Ninor, whom the dragon had previously ensnared in his spell of forgetfulness, erasing her memory and leaving her vulnerable and alone. Through this manipulation, he turned Chirin against those he loved, isolating him and driving him deeper into despair. The dragon's deception was so complete that Turin, in his confusion and anguish, committed acts that would haunt him forever. In the end, it was Chirin's own hand that ended his life. But it was Glaron who had set him on that path, laughing all the while at the misery he had caused. And yet, for all his power, the wicked beast was not invincible. Glaurung met his end at the hands of Turin, who, driven by a mix of courage, desperation, and the overwhelming desire for vengeance, confronted the dragon in a final, fateful encounter. With a heart heavy from the grief and torment Glaurung had inflicted upon him and his loved ones, Turin sought to put an end to the creature's malevolent influence. In a moment of fierce resolve, Turin took up his black sword, Gurthang, and with a precise and powerful strike, he plunged it into the dragon's belly, finding the one vulnerable spot in Glaurung's otherwise impenetrable hide. As the dragon's life ebbed away, he unleashed his final act of cruelty, revealing to Turin the full extent of his manipulations, how he had twisted the lives of those Turin held dear. The revelation was a crushing blow, leaving Turin to grapple with the unbearable horror of what he had unwittingly done under Glaurung's dark influence. The weight of the dragon's manipulations and the resulting devastation was a burden he could not bear, driving him to his tragic end. Glaurung's death marked the end of an era, but it was not the end of the dragons. Far from it. Morgoth, ever the cunning Dark Lord, had learned from his mistakes. As the fires of Angband smoldered and the world moved ever forward, so too did the evolution of dragons. Morgoth wasn't content with Glaurung, despite the terror he wrought. No, he saw greater potential. A future where his dragons would not just crawl upon the earth, but dominate the skies as well. And thus, the winged dragons were born. Imagine the dark pits of Angband, deep beneath the earth, where the fires burn hottest and the shadows are deepest. It's here that Morgoth labored, crafting these new creatures with even greater malice and destructive power. These dragons were not only larger and more fearsome than Glaurung, but they too possessed the ability to breathe fire. A fire so intense that it could melt stone and incinerate entire armies. The first and greatest of these winged dragons was Encalagon the Black. If Glaurung was the father of dragons, then Encalagon was the embodiment of their ultimate power. For he was not just a dragon. He was a force of nature, a living weapon designed to bring about the end of Morgoth's enemies. His wings spanned the sky, casting a shadow so vast it could blot out the sun. And his breath was a torrent of flame that could turn the bravest of warriors to ash. Encalagon's most famous appearance came during the War of Wrath, the final great battle of the First Age. By this time, Morgoth's forces were on the brink of defeat, with the Valar and their allies pushing ever closer to Angband. In a desperate bid to turn the tide of the war, Morgoth unleashed his most terrible weapon, Encalagon and the other winged dragons. The appearance of Encalagon, the Black, on the battlefield was nothing short of apocalyptic. It was as if the gates of hell itself had been thrown open. He led a host of winged dragons, a nightmarish legion that swept across the sky like a storm of death. Dragonfire scorched their path, The earth trembled beneath the might of his wings, and entire armies were scattered before him. It seemed that even the combined might of the Valar would be no match for this onslaught. But here is where the story takes a turn. For it was not just the combined might of the Valar that stood against Ancalagon.
No.
It was a single mortal, a man of courage and destiny, who bore the weight of the world's hopes on his shoulders. This man was Arundel, a mariner and a hero of Middle-earth, blessed with the light of a Silmaril, the most precious of all jewels, crafted by Fëanor and coveted by Morgoth himself. This Silmaril, a radiant fragment of pure starlight, was a source of hope, a symbol of all that was good and uncorrupted in the world. Arundel was no ordinary man. He was of both elven and human descent, and he had long been fated for greatness. When the forces of Morgoth unleashed Ancalagon upon the world, it was Arundel who answered the call. Taking to the skies in his ship, Vingalot, a vessel made of pure light and driven by the power of the Silmaril. This ship, glimmering like a star itself, soared into the heavens to confront the great dragon. The battle that ensued was one of the most epic and awe-inspiring confrontations in all of Tolkien's legendarium. Picture the scene, the night sky, once serene and dotted with stars, now ablaze with the furious light of dragon's fire. Ancalagon loomed above like a horrific storm, his wings blotting out the stars. The sheer scale of the battle was unimaginable. Ancalagon was so vast that his presence alone could shatter the will of armies. Yet here he was, facing a single ship, a single man. Arundel maneuvered Vengaloth with unmatched skill, dodging the searing blasts of fire that erupted from Ancalagon's. The light of the Silmaril shone brightly, spearing through the darkness and blinding the great dragon, who had never before encountered such purity. For hours they fought, the night sky a canvas of fire and light, until at last Arundel saw his moment. With a courage that defied all fear, he drove his ship directly at his foe. The Silmaril's light piercing the dragon's black heart. The mighty Ancalagon, the most fearsome of all Morgoth's creations, roared in agony as the light of the Silmaril seared his very essence. And then, with a final, earth-shattering blow, Arundel struck down the great dragon. Defeated and mortally wounded, he fell from the sky. His colossal body plummeted toward the earth, the impact so great that it shattered the very mountains of Thangorodrim, the peaks that had long been the seat of Morgoth's power. The ground quaked, the skies roared, and the shadow of Ancalagon was lifted from the world. His death marked the end of Morgoth's hope for victory in the War of Wrath. With their greatest weapon defeated, the forces of Unbanned crumbled, and Morgoth himself was finally captured and cast into the void, never to return. But the legacy of the winged dragons, and of Ancalagon in particular, would live on. In the aftermath of the War of Wrath, the world was changed. Beleriand was no more, sunk beneath the waves, and the surviving dragons were scattered, their numbers greatly diminished. Some fled to the far corners of the world, lurking in the deep places of the earth, waiting for a time when they might rise again. The second age of Middle-earth was a time of rebuilding, of new kingdoms rising, and old wounds slowly beginning to heal. It was also a time of dormancy for the dragons, those fearsome creatures who had wrought such devastation in the First Age. But dormancy does not mean extinction, and though the dragons were not as active, their presence still lingered. During the Second Age, the world was dominated by the rise of Numenor, the great island kingdom of men, and by the growing power of Sauron, the lieutenant of Morgoth, who had taken up his master's mantle after the War of Wrath. Sauron understood the power of dragons, but he did not seek to control them in the same way Morgoth had. Instead, he focused on other means of domination, most notably the creation of the One Ring. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. While Sauron was busy with his own dark designs, the dragons of the world were biding their time, lurking in the remote corners of Middle-earth, far from the eyes of men and elves. It was during this age that the dragons began to evolve further, adapting to the changing world around them. One of the most important events during this time was the emergence of cold drakes. These dragons were a different breed from their fire-breathing kin. They were larger, more resilient to the elements, and possessed a different kind of malevolence. While they did not have the destructive breath of their fiery cousins, they were just as dangerous, if not more so. These dragons were also more reclusive, preferring to remain hidden in their icy lairs rather than venture out into the wider world. These creatures made their homes in the northern wastes of Middle-earth, in the cold and desolate regions far from the more populated areas of the world. They were rarely seen by the inhabitants of Middle-earth, but their existence was known, whispered in hushed tones by those who had the misfortune of encountering them. One such tale speaks of a cold drake made its lair in the northward reaches of the Misty Mountains. This dragon, whose name has been lost to time, was said to have terrorized the dwarves of that region, causing them to abandon their mines and seek refuge elsewhere. The dragon's lair was never found, and the creature itself was never slain, leading many to believe that still slumbers deep within the mountains, waiting for the day when it will rise again. During this time, Sauron's focus was on the domination of the free peoples and the eventual downfall of Numenor, a task that required all his cunning and malice. With his attention turned to these grand schemes, the dragons had little reason to stir from their lairs, sensing that their time had not yet come. The great conflicts of the age, the seduction of the Númenóreans, the wars with the elves, and the rise of Sauron's dark empire played out largely without the involvement of dragons. And now we arrive at the Third Age, a time when the world was once again thrust into conflict, and when the most famous of all Tolkien's dragons made his mark on history. Smaug, the Golden, the Magnificent, the chiefest and greatest of calamities. His name alone sends shivers down the spine of any who know his story. And his tale is one that has been told and retold, immortalized in the pages of The Hobbit. Smaug was not just a dragon, he was the dragon. The culmination of all the dark power and malice that had been brewing since the days of Morgoth. He was absolutely massive, covered in scales that glistened like gold and jewels, with eyes that burned with an inner fire. But what truly set Smaug apart was his cunning. He was a creature of intelligence, of wit, and of a terrifying awareness of his own power. Smaug's story begins long before Bilbo Baggins ever set foot in the Shire. It begins with the kingdom of Erebor, the lonely mountain, home to the dwarves of Durin's line. Erebor was a place of great wealth, a kingdom built on the riches of the earth, where the dwarves mined gold and jewels in such abundance that their halls shone with the light of countless treasures. But as we know, where there is great wealth, there is also great danger. The riches of Erebor did not go unnoticed, and it wasn't long before the whispers of their wealth reached the ears of Smaug. The dragon, drawn to treasure, decided that Erebor would make a fine home for himself, and so he set out to claim it. The fall of Erebor was swift and merciless. Smaug descended upon the lonely mountain with the fury of a storm. The dwarves, for all their strength and bravery, were no match for the dragon. They were driven from their home, forced to flee as Smaug laid waste to their kingdom, and claimed the vast hoard of treasure for himself. For many years, Smaug ruled over Erebor, a blight upon the land. The town of Dale, once a thriving community, was reduced to ruins, and the people of the surrounding lands lived in constant fear of the dragon's wrath. Smaug, in his arrogance, believed himself invincible, the master of all he surveyed. But behind the scenes, there were those who recognized the greater threat Smaug posed, particularly the wise wizard Gandalf. Gandalf knew that if Smaug were to remain unchallenged, he could become a powerful ally for Sauron, who was already beginning to stir in the shadows of Middle-earth. The thought of the Dark Lord gaining control over such a terrible force was too great a risk, and so Gandalf sought a way to neutralize this threat. And here we come to the story of The Hobbit, a tale that begins in a quiet corner of the world, in the Shire, with a certain hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. It was Bilbo's involvement in the quest of Erebor that would ultimately lead to Smaug's downfall, though neither he nor the dragon could have predicted it. Bilbo, along with a company of dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield, set out to reclaim Erebor and the treasure within. The journey was a pretty long one, filled with dangers both expected and unforeseen. But it was the confrontation with Smaug that was the most daunting of all. When Bilbo first entered Smaug's lair, the sight that greeted him was one of awe and terror. There, amidst the mountains of gold and jewels, lay Smaug. His body coiled around his hoard, his eyes glowing like embers in the dark. The dragon, sensing the presence of the intruder, began to speak. And it was then that Bilbo realized he was not dealing with a brutish beast, but with a being of deadly intelligence. The conversation between Bilbo and Smaug is one of the most famous in Tolkien's works. a battle of wits as much as anything else. Smaug, with his grandeur, tried to intimidate Bilbo, while Bilbo, with his quick thinking and clever words, managed to hold his own. But it was in this conversation that Smaug made a fatal mistake. In his arrogance, he revealed a weakness, a small patch on his underbelly where the scales were missing, exposing his flesh. This information would prove to be Smaug's undoing. When the dragon, enraged by the intrusion, left his lair to exact his revenge on the region of Lake Town, it was a man named Bard who took up the challenge of defending his home. Armed with the knowledge of Smaug's weakness, Bard fired an arrow, the Black Arrow, into the dragon's vulnerable spot, killing him and ending his reign of terror. Smaug's death heralded the end of another era, but it also set in motion a chain of events that would have deep consequences for the world of Middle-earth. The treasure hoard of Erebor, now unguarded, became the focal point of a conflict that drew in men, elves, and dwarfs alike, culminating in the battle of 5 armies. But more than that, Smaug's death signaled the beginning of the end for Sauron's plans. The dragon's presence had kept the northern regions of Middle-earth destabilized, preventing any meaningful opposition to Sauron's growing power in the south. With Smaug gone, the free peoples of Middle-earth were able to begin uniting against the threat of the Dark Lord and the looming War of the Ring. It's fascinating to consider how the actions of one creature, even as powerful as Smaug, could have such far-reaching effects. But that's the nature of dragons in Tolkien's world. They're not just isolated beings. They are catalysts for change, for good or ill, in the grand tapestry of Middle-earth's history. It is said that other dragons, lesser in might than Smaug or Oncalagon, still dwelt in the far reaches of the world. In the cold wastes of the north, in the deep caves of the mountains, and in the unexplored corners of Middle-earth. These creatures slumbered as a reminder of the ancient evils that had once plagued the world. The dwarfs, in particular, were ever wary of these creatures, knowing all too well the devastation a dragon could bring. There are hints in the lore of encounters with these dragons, of skirmishes fought in the shadows, and of hordes of treasure still guarded by these ancient beasts. And yet, for all the fear they inspired, there was also a certain fascination with dragons. They were creatures of extreme power and majesty, beings that represented the untamed and the unknowable. To encounter one was to stand before something ancient and primal, something that connected the present to the distant past. And so, my dear friends, we close the book on tonight's Tales. I hope you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of Middle-earth, where dragons rule the skies and ancient legends breathe fire into our imaginations. As we part for the night, know that the world of Middle-earth, with all its wonders and dangers, will always be there, waiting for you to return, whenever you need a reminder that even in the face of the greatest of challenges, there is always hope. Until next time, may your nights be filled with the quiet rustle of old stories, and may your sleep and dreams be as peaceful as a moonlit walk through the Shire, Farewell for now.